This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us for a 3-day hands-on Cone 6 glaze mixing workshop with John Britt, July 18th through the 20th. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 543 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Derek Reeverts, who is a figure sculptor based in Gainesville, Florida, where he's the senior teaching lab specialist at the University of Florida. In our interview, we talk about his use of symbols and tools to depict the Midwestern work ethic, teaching students to build and use energy-efficient kilns, and the changes the Florida education system has gone through in recent years. Derek is a member of the NSECA Green Task Force, which will have a showing and presence at this year's NSECA conference. That's happening this week, so in just a few days in Salt Lake City. If you would like to be a part of the Green Task Force, go to the project space and check out Matt Fisk, Hamish Jackson, and others who will be sharing their experience with wild clay. If you're at the conference, I'd love if you also come out to the live tapings that are going to be happening throughout the day, March the 27th and 28th in the podcast room. There's going to be 7 tapings, so there's going to be a lot of different offerings on a lot of different topics. So if you want to find out more, go to nseka.net. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, I'm doing a book signing also that Thursday, March the 27th. So I'm going to be at the Archie Bray Clay booth at 3 p.m., signing copies of the complete guide to low-fire glazes for potters and sculptors. So if you're in Salt Lake City, I hope to see you there. Before we get to this interview with Derek, I also wanted to mention that I'm going to be taking part in this year's Asparagus Valley Pottery Trail, where I'm excited to be a guest of Lucy Fagella. That's going to be happening April the 26th and 27th in Greenfield, Massachusetts. We're also going to be having the first annual Princeton Pottery Festival at the Princeton Day School in Princeton, New Jersey, May the 3rd and 4th. I'm excited for this to happen. This has been something that I've been on the planning committee for and have been working towards for the last year or more. Both of these will feature excellent selections of both emerging and established artists, so I hope to see you there. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. I thought that we would start talking about labor in general, because so much of the figurative work that you make, labor is a part of that. And you actually wrote on your website, which I got a kick out of this, you said, I'm a Midwesterner. Being productive is how I know peace. So can you talk about using symbols of work in the sculpture?
When you look at my work, it's a figure of me, not necessarily is the work about me, but it usually uses my general imagery as a placeholder for talking about whatever the piece is talking about. When it comes to symbology, a lot of that's really intentional. I be remiss to say that some of it's not maybe accidental sometimes, but I mean, the first biggest one that people notice is the blue jeans, right? It's like that's very casual, it's workwear, it's Midwestern, it's, and I pay a lot of attention to making those. When I get comments on the work, um, probably 7 times out of 10, people will say, how did you get those jeans to look so real, right? So there's a lot of attention and focus on that. And the idea of, because like that's what I wear every single day. It's what I grew up in. It's what everybody that I grew up around wore typically when they weren't wearing their Carhartts. But so, that's a big one. The footwear, the boots, I mean, all of it, right? Like it's, boots, work boots. Sometimes it's work boots. Sometimes it's cowboy boots. But where I come from, those are work boots too. And, so it's very immersed in the working class, blue collar. That was, where I grew up, even white collar folks were kind of blue collar. So it's, they're like a lighter blue collar. And a lot of times you see, like when you're talking about the t-shirts, I do two things with. If it's a white t-shirt, it's definitely talking about working class proletarian values, like that kind of the white, just a plain white t-shirt, right? Like the other thing that I do is when it's a graphic tee, it'll have some very specific symbology usually about the piece and what it's talking about. Belt buckles, of course. The belt buckle is something that it was funny when I was growing up in grade school and high school. It's not anything that I ever wore. I didn't actually do the whole belt buckle thing until after I got out of the area, which is kind of funny. But where and when I grew up, if you didn't wear belt buckles and Carhartts, like you weren't in the cool crowd. And generally the bigger the buckle, the more kind of badass you were, I guess. So I reference a lot of the time and place of how I grew up and sort of the values that I have on that. And I want, part of the reason I do that and that symbology is it's relatable, to like the middle America. And when I make a piece, one thing I always tell my students is once I make a piece, I want it to be accessible to everybody. And symbolic. The reason I'm talking about this is the symbology and the specifics that I was talking about are part of that accessibility, right? Even if it's something like, because like when I'm done with a piece, I sit back and I wonder, can somebody that I went to high school with, and that was a public high school, my graduating class was 29 people in the middle of cornfields, and I think only two or three of us maybe went on to higher ed out of that class. But I look at the piece and I say, can the people I went to high school, like, can they get something out of it? And that can be something like, like that's how I feel when I wake up in the morning. It can be something, very, very straightforward. It doesn't matter as long as they're connecting with the work on some level. And I think that's really important. As far as the other symbologies go, I mean, there's a ton of symbologies that I put in there. Usually what I do is I use the t-shirt graphic and the belt buckle as like a vignette and a counter vignette of intention. So I try to transpose those against each other so they almost have different values on the symbology that I'm using between the graphic on the t-shirt and whatever is on the belt buckle. And I lock up a lot of different things in that. Just like I've done a lot of different jobs in my life, but I worked as a program assistant in a high school graphics vocational class and taught how to make t-shirts, so like doing the design work on that was kind of came with that. And I worked in ad marketing for a little bit, worked in a tattoo shop for a year. So there's a lot of like design and and symbology that comes into it. The other symbology that I use is very specific symbology. So a lot of times you'll see things like a fist, a crown, a key, and those are all really specific symbologies to me and my experience. As kind of I mean, it's almost like code, I guess, in a way. And when I put it in, like the fist is usually something that's like. I mean, like the proletarian imagery of, rise up, working class, unity, those kind of themes. My father was both a high school teacher and high school English teacher and a minister for, I think he was a high school teacher for 32 years and a minister for like 42 years. And so, the idea of the key and crown, authority and access to, specifically information or education, a lot of that gets coded into.
One of your recent pieces that you put into a show that was at the Moravian Arts Center in St. Pete is called Be Careful What You Wish For. And it's you standing above a piece of wood with an anvil, a golden anvil with a hammer in your hand. And well, for one, going back to symbols, tools, like having tools be a symbol for clay people, that makes sense because we sort of elevate our tools, like we keep tools for a long time. There's something special, a relationship we have. So can you talk about that piece and what those symbols mean in that context?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that, and not all of it is in line. Some of it's a little contradictive, I guess. I like to, just for me as a sculptor, I like to make those tools, look as real as possible. I like to, like the forging hammer that's in his hand in that piece is actually one that we've got in the metal shop down there. And so I like to replicate in small scale because I'm also, I know this will shock people, a miniature gamer as well. And that's where a lot of my skill set comes from, is the painting and the miniature modeling. And so, it's just the fun of doing that in some ways, but you're right. I do include tools and that sort of blue collar value of the use of those tools. Where I grew up in Illinois, my mother's parents, my grandparents, my grandfather was a farmer, and my grandmother was a farm grandmother, and they just worked the farm together. So there was always, tools around, and my father, even though he was a teacher and a minister, he was always working on something. He actually built the house that we lived in when I was growing up. He and a friend of his, so there was, he was constantly making things and using tools, and I think, like they start to, I think tools really strongly represent not just ideas, but ideals, right? So it's like, you can see this in logos in lots of different places. Unions a lot of times will include tools and like what their trade is and their logos, and I think, so like I think they become strong sort of icons of ideals. So for me in that specific piece, the hammer and the anvil. One of the other things that I do. I also do metalsmithing. I've done a lot of forging in my life, and I started kind of with a chunk of railroad line and a hammer in the backyard when I was 14. With like pieces of metal and doing things. I was always also working. Grew up in a time when there wasn't, thankfully, a lot of internet distractions, so I was constantly making something. So, the idea of forging and using metal and those tools and that specific set for me has been present for most of my life. I met and worked with a guy who's one of the country's most respected edge weaponsmiths when I went to grad school in Ohio, and I went and worked in his workshop, here and there just because we were friends. And And I still try to do some here at University of Florida when I have a moment of free time. But so it's, the metal smithing is also something I do. But as far as the piece goes, the relationship with the hammer and the anvil. So at the end of the day, the piece is really, to be careful what you wish for, and it has a lot to do, if I have to be totally transparent, with career choices and life choices. And it's, he's approaching, the stump, because you always keep an anvil on a wood stump to absorb the shock of the blow. And but the anvil is gold. And have you ever? I guess it's similar to the idea of, have you ever heard the term golden handcuffs?
It's exactly what I was thinking.
That's what that is. It just happens to be an anvil instead of a set of handcuffs, right? But the question, so it poses the idea of, like, there's value to having gold, right? Because it's on the piece, it's actual luster, so it is actually gold on the surface of the piece. But the anvil is also really tiny compared to what he normally, for his size, would be working on. But again, there's value because the thing is gold, right? Um, but then the question is there value for what he's doing because it's gold, right? Like, we value the idea of gold, but at the end of the day, if the function of what I need to do is to forge something, having an anvil of gold is about as useless as, having one out of dirt. Probably more useless in a lot of ways. So that's the relationship there with that piece, the symbology involved. So that the hammer sort of represents intent and ability and skill, and then the anvil represents kind of that choice that you're approaching what you've done for yourself in your life and the things that you set up and that kind of basis. And again, it's the hammer and anvil, right? So it's that.
Yeah, and I like that piece for its impractical practicality. Like the anvil is obviously a working tool. You don't casually get an anvil. So the idea of making an impractical one, like, there's a sense of humor in that I think shows up in other work, but it's also a comment on what it's like to work in Florida right now as a person working in a university system. Like, knowing you and knowing your story, there's a lot embedded in that you're using that symbol to create.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to talk about how you as a person have aged and how you've depicted your own age. So that was a recent piece. Like, that's in a show, like, literally right now in St. Pete.
Yeah.
But when I was researching back to your work, like 2012, even earlier than that, what I'm watching is you age through the work, but also your ideas about art age through the work. So can you talk about self-portraiture as a record of time?
So self-portraiture, as I was talking before, using myself as kind of a placeholder. A lot of it has to do, like, one of my faves is Robert Arneson, right? Like, he's somebody I studied a lot in grad school. I'm a huge fan of his work, and he did this too. So it's not, I'm not inventing this by any stretch of the imagination, and many people have come before him. But one of the things that he did for the work, from my perspective, that was a little new and fresh, was the idea of using it as a placeholder, talking about, using humor to talk about something serious. So aging through the work, I think it's a lot of, before I started sort of updating my age to the work, and actually my grad professor at one point was just like, Derek, you need an update. You keep, like, I'm looking at this work of you when you were in grad school and you're not that age anymore. Like, what are you doing here? And in some ways I sort of, like, pushed that off for a while because it was a placeholder, because a lot of early on, and this is kind of addressing your question of how the work has changed with me, and aged with me. When I was in grad school, a lot of the work was about kind of ridiculous things, kind of fun. It was silly. And these were questions, that I asked coming from a space of being really comfortable, of, having a good support system and not having necessarily to ask, I don't know, I guess, like the more intense or darker questions of life. So it was very lighthearted, and a lot of what I did was I kind of kept it in my what I referred to as 2000X, right? Like it was kind of those years for me, and it was accurate for the time frame. But then it became the Neverland effect, right? Where it was like this time where I kind of put my thoughts back to and tried to be in that space to be able to kind of, I guess, tap back into that magic and do those things. But at a certain point, and I'll be honest, like a lot of that came crashing down in 2016. And so a lot of how, like, the questions I was asking changed. And a lot of things happened for me in 2016. I mean, it was it's beginning of Trump's first term. I became a father in 2016. And so, like a lot of your I mean, as a parent, like when you become a parent, a lot of your priorities shift, right? And I think you and I have had that conversation a little bit before. So the questions changed and they became more mature. And so I felt like as the questions changed and all of those things shifted, that the maturity of the work should reflect that and change with it, and it's just being honest, I'm a little more gray than I was back in the day. You got to add that in, but at the same time, it's good to, like I typically, like my sculptures, I don't sign them. I don't have to, right? Because they're me. Like, somebody wants to try to make me and, make a copy of what I'm doing. I guess that's super flattering, but generally it's just this record of me. And it's, I don't know, I guess it's kind of curious for me to be able to like look back down through the pieces that I have, like the photos of the pieces, and I don't know, almost kind of like a telephone line through time for myself,
You often work at what I would say is like an enlarged figurine scale, like it's not as small as the gaming as you talked about, like doing miniature gaming. It's not that type of figurine. It's more roughly the size of a torso, a human torso.
10 to 12 inches is, yeah.
But what I find is interesting is that because that scale is not changing throughout the larger, years worth of body of work, the way you photograph it is how you give emphasis to certain points. Because a lot of times when I see your work, I won't notice all the details you've put into it. But then when you photograph it, because you're emphasizing the content, the photo becomes important. I guess this is the shorter way to say that.
Sure.
So can you talk about documenting figure sculpture and being able to physically represent it, or I guess pictorially represent it?
Yeah, so documenting is my least favorite thing to do. What's funny is when I was in ad marketing, I was what was called a photo resources coordinator. I used a camera all the time, and I'm well versed in a camera. I just hate all the setup and all the stuff that goes with it, because you like do all this rigmarole, and at the end of the day, you're like, well, I just did 4 pieces, and it took me like 6 hours. It's before I go on with the photo documentation stuff. One of the other things with this, going back to the symbology that you were just talking about, of like putting all the details in. Another one of the things that I do is the proportion of the figures change depending on certain things that I'm trying to throw out. So like one piece had like the proportions of Michelangelo's David, with the, like, if you look at it from the front, not from the base, where it's like a shortened legs and longer, bigger head. And so, a lot of that also comes from old Celtic art, in which they would enlarge the head because they were, they thought it was the seat of the soul, and were, in their way, sort of like putting more value on the idea of intelligence and what the head does, but with documentation, I think at the end of the day, it ends up just kind of being, I think of it a lot in the same way that I would frame a drawing or a painting. That's kind of what it is. And when you're talking about being able to see through my eyes for those things, it's like, me kind of opening up a page in my sketchbook, being like, here, look at this thing. And, this is kind of what I'm focusing on. And the marks, because you can't determine the marks in a photograph is easily, there's no real marks. Being able to focus in and frame things in a certain way is really important for being able to do that, because there's certain, as you've already established, there's a lot of symbology that goes into things, and it's like, what is the sort of the value of that, and what is the most important? And
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Are you making the journey out to Salt Lake City this year for NCECA? The Archie Bray Clay business is excited to see you all there and can't wait to share some great new tools, glazes, merch, and the always popular Bray Patch and Bray Epoxy. This year, we'll be hosting live book signings with authors Ben Carter and Sunshine Cobb, all at Booth 5 right up front in the expo hall. To stay on top of new product updates, promotions, or to sign up for our newsletter, visit us at archiebrayclay.com.
I wanted to switch gears and talk about your time at UF. Can you talk about being a teaching lab specialist, just what even that means, and a technician?
Well, after being here, I've been here since 2013. And so I've been here for a second, and it's a job with a lot of vague specificity. Like that title, the title is supposed to be teaching lab specialist, right? So it's like we are, that's the way it's supposed to be, according to HR, the way it's supposed to be broken down. Because the idea is that we are educators that have, all of us have the same degree as the faculty, and we are here supporting in this kind of supportive role, but a supportive educational role. So, part of what I do is teach materiality. I teach, I'm the head of I'm chair of the health and safety committee for the school, and I get tapped by the college a lot too. So like when COVID happened, everybody was kind of ramping down. I was like ramping up. So I wear a lot of hats. I mean, after 11 years, almost going into 12 years here, the best way I can describe what I do is I'm just kind of mama bear. So what I tell my students is, if you think of you and your instructor and the projects that they give you and the grades that they give you for the projects, like I do everything around that. So I'm, ordering and maintaining materials, making sure everybody is interacting as far as like the classrooms go, logistics. I have to figure all that, storage space, a lot of the classroom interaction time. I make sure all the equipment is working, and that is no small feat considering how many kilns we have. But also it's new technology. I build kilns with grads, and when we have the time, the space, and the money to do it, and the opportunity, I guess. Let's see what else. I do a certain amount of administrative stuff, and recruiting, and there's just a lot of invisible things. I mean, anybody who spends any time in academia knows that there's so many things that end up in your orbit that nobody ever talks about or thinks about, that you just end up doing to make everything work. And that's, a lot of where I'm at.
And I think also the mama bear role is a good explanation, actually, because you're also the core when the faculty changes. So you've been there as professors have retired, and as their lines have either been renewed or not, there's not automatically a full-time professor that's been hired right away. Right. So you're kind of the core holding the thing together. And that is a really big task, because it's not a checklist task. It's not like you do A, B, and C. What you might need to do is go talk to a grad student for 30 minutes about how they're feeling. You know what I mean? Like that's not easy to codify how to even do that, but it's something that you end up having to do. So can you talk about a little about like the soft skills of being a technician?
The soft skills as far as like
sort of student interactions and also actually professor interactions, because they're coming to you. You're the one that's been there the longest by far.
I am the institutional memory in a lot of ways at this point for U of Ceramics. I think there's a lot of people skills involved in being in academia, especially academia that's an institution that's this large. One thing that I developed after COVID, because everybody was really isolated by necessity, and one thing that I would go to the students and say, do you feel listened to? Do you feel supported? Like, if you don't, talk to me. Let's talk this, like, what is it that you need to be able to do what you do? And that's, I don't know, in a way, there's a lot of, and I've talked to some of our students about this before. There's a little bit, as a parent, I can tell you that there is a little bit of crossover with like kind of parenting and doing what I do for the students in a way. And it's not being a parent for them, because, I'm not their parent. But I think that there's a lot of those soft skills, as you say, kind of go back and forth. But it's also, it's also being diplomatic. It's teaching them how to be professional in our field. I don't think it's any one thing, and and the mama bearness isn't just, I use that term because I don't want it to feel just like I'm coddling them, because it's like, occasionally, you gotta help them help themselves. And there's, some to that.
Yeah, it's hard to emotionally support someone while you're holding them accountable for their own behavior.
And they can get mad sometimes.
Yes.
And like you have to be able to like absorb that and not get angry at them. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a skill set. And one that I've developed. I mean, it's not, so I think some of it's inherent just to who I am, but I think a lot of it came from, and like one of the things that I every time I say about this job is, the ladies who were here was, Linda Arbuckle, Nan Smith, and Anna Clory Holcomb. And a lot of the reason I took this job was to learn from them. Believe me, it was not the paycheck. It was because I wanted to come and learn from them. In a lot of ways for the program, especially when they were all retiring, I felt a little bit like both a pallbearer and a midwife in a lot of ways. And I kind of still feel like that as we're kind of working through transition.
Yeah, and also just to be in a position where 3 long-term professors, all of them taught for 40 plus years, not all at UF, but in their careers, and to have them all 3 retire in a 10-year span, even less than a 10-year span.
Less than.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge transition for the university. How do you think that the university can grow and reestablish its identity after having 3 long-term professors?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm not sure I'm the best to answer that, honestly. I think a lot of it has to do, well, the thing that we got to remember is that a lot has changed in higher ed. But even between, since the time I got here in 2013, and certainly from the time that they got here when they each, arrived here, certain things grow and certain things shrink, and like, certain things change. A lot of our focus now at UF, the faculty are focusing on a lot of interdisciplinary as far as how the curriculum is going. So there's a certain shift. I mean, from having been here that it was laser focused when you were here, as far as like, even down to like certain types of classes for specified vessel and like so on and so forth. And, and so that stuff changes. How it kind of grow and changes, and can rebuild its identity. I mean, a lot of that has to do with who they hire, as far as faculty go. And, but I think a lot of it has to do with the faculty at large, and, who's calling the shots from the director's office and the dean's office.
And also political funding. I mean, like being in Florida, being a major university in a southern state, like I feel like Florida is on the front lines of the culture wars. And you really see, like when they cut government funding for education, Florida feels it. Yeah. And it's a big university. Like I had a friend that was in a PhD program at Florida, and they ended the whole department in the middle of her PhD, and she ended up she transferred to Nebraska because that's where her professor went. So it's tough.
Yeah, and it's also, a lot of that has to do with the peripheral politics to the university, right? Where it's like, we just went through a stint with Ben Sass as president, and like he left, he said, because of health reasons, family health reasons. I don't think it's a coincidence that he left after 18 months of being here, after he overspent his budget by $12 million of the university's money, 12 million. So President Fox, when he was here, his operation budget was 5 million for like the total fiscal year, and Sass pushed it to 17. And I mean, got a bunch of his friends from his old job as a congressman on payroll, and did a bunch of like kind of questionable, shady things. And he was also kind of, I think, more appointed than than anything. But it's that peripheral politics, right? Like with DeSantis and a lot of the policies and the a whole like don't say gay thing that he was pushing, like a lot of, because that affects who comes and, who's interested in actually being in the state. I mean, part of the reason a lot of people say, well, if it's so terrible, why do you stay in the state? Well, part of the reason I stay here is because I have friends that stuff affects, and I want to make sure that I'm here to help them and protect that and be a voice of reason and kind of push back on that.
Well, I wanted to switch gears and talk about your work with sustainability. You're a member of the NSECA Green Task Force, but you also have instituted sustainable practices in the UF Ceramic Studio. So can you talk about that? Like, how do you get the idea of environmentalism and sustainability into a working ceramic studio? Or how have you done that?
A lot of research. It's a lot of kind of paying attention and intention, I think. I mean, for me personally, I mean, the environmentalism, when I was an undergrad in college, I remember spending a lot to have these postcards printed out, these like pre-addressed postcards that were addressed to the then governor of Alaska, saying that whoever was sending it, you just filled in your name, we're going to boycott Alaskan tourism because they were shooting wolves from helicopters for no other reason than to bring hunters in to shoot wolves from helicopters, right? And so like that was me at, I don't know, 18, 19, 20 years old. And that's kind of followed me in everything I have done all through my experience in life. So it's not a new thing for me. It's just something that I've always tried to keep my finger on the pulse of. As far as here, it's especially, well, to be fair, Florida does have they do pay attention a bit to environmental things because we have to. It's not, I don't feel like it's an altruistic thing statewide. I think it's let's keep our tourist spaces that everybody loves clean so we keep getting money because nobody wants to come to a, oil covered beach or, whatever. So it's like, so a lot of that's by necessity and not by design. But here for the practice here, it's just kind of fit stuff in when you can. And, it's like, it's kind of like doing one thing, focusing on this thing. So, one of the things that you've seen recently was the wood kiln that I built that I focused on. It's like, do that thing, make that thing. Now kind of shift gears to look at this other portion, how do we affect different things? And I just sort of like kind of cut out different areas to focus on and go from point to point. One of the first things that I did when I got here was actually to be able to do tests and the firing for the kilns, the electric kilns that we have. And luckily we helped Scott beta test kiln links. So I have a lot of that information, and it was very easy for me to be able to get that information because of that system. But be able to tell, per like cubic inch in the kiln, like how much energy is being used and how much is it costing us to fire it. And like, how does that, how does that map as far as who's checking out one, what kiln, what size of kiln are you using? Are you filling it up all the way? Basic, very simple things like that we're all kind of taught. And some of us pay attention to, especially if you're doing it in your own home, in your own studio, because you want to be as efficient as possible when it's on your dime. When it's at school, it's kind of, a lot of times people lose track of that because it's not their money.
Well, I wanted to talk about that kiln a little bit, the wood kiln. It's a variation of a Phoenix fast fire model,
It is.
but it is super efficient. Like you were telling me that it takes 5 wheelbarrows, not cords, 5 wheelbarrows of wood.
Industrial size wheelbarrows, like the big wheelbarrows.
Which is nothing. That is such a small amount of wood to fire to cone 10. Tell me a little bit about that, the idea of a super efficient wood kiln.
A lot of it has to do with, because like when you were looking at it, we were having the conversation, and I admittedly tossed the dice in some ways and was kind of like playing with the numbers. I used as a basis, I pulled a lot of my information out of Fred Olson's kiln book, right? So like that was the kind of blueprint for being able to build it, but I adjusted things, understanding like chimney draw. And the whole idea was to create something that didn't put off a lot of reduction smoke, because we are kind of in the center. We have residence halls around, and we're not in the middle of campus per se, but we have a lot of areas around that don't want to see, a bunch of pluming black smoke come out of the top of our buildings. So the idea was to have a chimney that didn't overdraw, but would draw enough that a lot of that carbon got burnt up in the process, and so there wasn't a lot of smoke coming out the top. And to have a chamber that, part of it is of the efficiency is being able to have like 2 to 3 people do a firing. It's a 13 cubic foot chamber is how big it is, and it's being able to have 2, 3, 4, 5 people, fire it efficiently, and being able to have that turnover. It's a smaller up and a smaller down as far as like the temperature and the fuel that it takes to get it there. And so it's not, if you're running the big, up the hill Monogamos, that stuff takes so much fuel, because you're heating all of that up, right? So it's, and being able to, with the build of it, one of the things I loved about the fast fire is that the firebox is underneath the chamber. So you're really cashing in on all of the heat, right? Like it's, you're heating up the bricks above it, and that kind of, prefaces and doubles up on the efficiency of heating the chamber.
And I think it's a great teaching kiln because it's small enough that they can, if you had a wood fire potter, they could fire that thing every week if they really wanted to. So they're getting more information, faster turnaround. And I always think about that with school kilns versus studio kilns, when I've worked in production studios. Like schools, small kilns are great. That's what you need to get that info out of there.
And the other thing is, as far as, I'm sure anybody listening to this will think that, bigger kilns are more efficient in the big picture for firing things. And a lot of times that's true. But with doing the kiln of that size, I was able to like tweak those efficiency numbers a little bit easier. And, at the end of the day, like you said, it's a teaching kiln. That was the intention of it, because that's what we do.
To wrap up, can you plug and talk a little bit about the NSECA Green Task Force, what you guys are doing, and also we're coming up to NSECA, so what will be happening at the conference?
Yeah, so as the task force, we do a lot of things. We have certain events, and we have a satellite group called the Green Learning Community that's open to everybody, and it meets once a month. And it goes from topic to topic. So like, the last meeting actually I led, and it was talking about, how to balance, studio sustainability and family. And so we do different, in the learning community, we do different topics that are interesting that people might be interested in jumping in on. In general, we focus on sustainability. We try to advise best practices as far as, everything. There's a website that we have that has a lot of information about sustainable practice, and people can access that. A lot of it kind of focuses in on really is kind of a practical approach to studio things, like what do I do with my glaze waste? What do I do? How do I make sure that this water isn't getting into a bigger water supply with, whatever chemicals, and like what things can I do to make the kiln fun? And Lisa Orr in the rocket kiln that was in the main conference, the resource hall that was there, and kind of showing people how to build and operate one of those. So, we just try to, it's not, we focus, different members of the committee will focus on different things. Mine specifically is carbon footprint. But like Brian Cole, who I'm sure like he focuses a lot on water quality. And so it's not just one thing. And we try to kind of hit all of the areas of best practice and sustainability together, and just provide as much information to people as we can.
If people want to check that out, it's NSECA GTF, like Green Task Force. So NSECAGTF.com is where a lot of those resources are held. Can you plug your own website and social media so people can follow you?
DerekReeverts.com is my website, and they can find me on Instagram at Derek_Reeverts, and then my Facebook artist page is Derek Reeverts and the Quandary of Quiddity. That's a mouthful.
Well, thanks so much, man. It was good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much, Ben.
I'd like to thank Derek for coming on the show and for the good work that he is doing at the University of Florida. The exhibition that we mentioned in this interview is called Presence Felt, and it features faculty that are teaching at Florida universities. That exhibition is co-curated by Molly Duff Clark and is up until March the 27th at the Morian Arts Center. That's in St. Petersburg, Florida, so if you're down in that Tampa Bay, St. Pete area, I hope you'll check that out. You can find out more at morianartscenter.org. Before we go, I wanted to thank today's sponsors. That's Cornell Studio Supply and Bray Clay. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, we do need sponsors for 2025, so please get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. If you're going to be in NSECA, I hope to see you there. Drop into the podcast room and say hello. And as always, thanks for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.